Coco Gauff issues statement after backlash to controversial comments. Coco Gauff caused a stir when she called out the worst fans in tennis. Coco Gauff has spoken out after receiving backlash for branding American tennis fans the worst for supporting their players. The two-time Grand Slam champion is currently competing at the United Cup, a mixed-gender team tournament. Defending champions, Team USA, were drawn to play their group stage matches against Spain and Argentina in Perth. Should they make it to the semifinals and beyond, they'd fly to Sydney for the rest of the tournament. But Gauff wasn't expecting a strong showing from their supporters, especially in Perth. Ahead of the tournament, the world number 3 explained, "I'll be honest, no. I feel like we're definitely, in the tennis department, the worst when it comes to that. So I've always said I wish our country and other places would show up throughout the world as we see maybe smaller countries support. But I also think it's just because of our country is good in so many sports, so it's just hard. Yeah, I definitely think there are Americans that come out more in Melbourne than necessarily here, but I would like to see some more Americans, if we make it to Sydney, in Sydney than there were last year." Gauff's comments sparked backlash from fans who thought she expected Americans to travel around the world cheering for their players. Others branded the 21-year-old out of touch, but Gauff has now shared a lengthy response on social media, explaining that she was never referring to supporters at home who couldn't afford to fly to tournaments. I am going to clarify because people are dragging this out of context. I am not expecting people to travel to tournaments to watch us play. But there are many tournaments that we have in America and abroad where Americans are already attending regardless of who is playing, excluding US Open, where people come and don't really cheer for their countryman player, the reigning French Open champion tweeted. Whereas those from smaller countries come with their colors and flags and it is clear on who they are supporting. I was just speaking from my perspective. Trust me, I understand the financial aspect of things and no, tennis is not accessible for everyone. It was more of a comment for those who are already attending and how I wish they were as passionate as those from other countries, more specifically team events. People don't owe me anything, I was just honestly answering a question I was asked and it was simply an observation I noticed about other countries versus mine, that is all. Nevertheless, I am grateful for any support no matter how big or small it is." Gauff has still been enjoying the encouragement from the crowds in Perth, where she stormed through her first match of the season to beat Argentina's Solana Sierra 6-1 6-1 in under an hour. She then took to the court alongside Christian Harrison to win the tie for their team in mixed doubles. But the world number 3 had a tough time in her second singles match against Spain's Jessica Bouzas Monero, losing 6-1 6-7, 6, 6-0. The victory, the backlash, and the statement. Coco Gauff's moment in the storm. Paris, Roland Garros. On a breezy June afternoon, Coco Gauff stood at the center court of the French Open, a champion again. At just 21 years old, she had just battled from a set down to beat world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka and claimed her second Grand Slam singles title. For many, it was another milestone in the rapid ascent of American tennis's brightest young star. Her poise, resilience, and power on the clay in Paris had captivated fans worldwide. But a few days later, the focus slipped from her on-court triumph to off-court reactions that spiraled into unexpected controversy. The spark: controversial comments. The backlash didn't stem directly from Coco Gauff, but from Sabalenka's remarks after the final. In the heat of the moment, following her defeat, Sabalenka had suggested that Gauff's victory was less a result of her brilliance and more because she, Sabalenka, had faltered. Namely, that Gauff won not because she played incredible, just because I made all of those mistakes. So, the comments struck many as ungracious and dismissive, implying that Gauff's performance wasn't worthy of celebration and that the conditions, her own missteps, or even another player might have altered the result. This didn't sit well with fans, commentators, and fellow players alike, and social media quickly lit up with criticism. The backlash and support. Across platforms, from X, formerly Twitter, to Instagram, the response was swift. Some fans called Sabalenka's comments unprofessional, arguing that they diminished the sport's spirit and undermined Gauff's achievement. Others emphasized that a Grand Slam final, under windy, unpredictable conditions, was a demanding stage and that mental fatigue can make even the greatest players say things they later regret. A sector of supporters rallied behind Gauff, applauding her composure and prioritizing respect for competitors, even amid defeat. Amid the discourse, Gauff found herself in a spotlight she didn't ask for. Gauff's statement, grace and perspective. Rather than feeding the fire, Gauff chose calm and clarity. Her public statement, delivered through her verified social channels and press interactions, embraced a tone that was measured, thoughtful, and rooted in respect. While not attacking Sabalenka or dismissing the criticism, Gauff focused on the broader values she stands for. Acknowledgement of achievement. Gauff expressed deep pride in her performance, emphasizing the hard work that had brought her to that title. She recognized the significance of her victory, not just for herself, but for fans who saw her as a representation of perseverance, focus, and inspiration. Empathy and sportsmanship rather than escalating tensions, Gauff dedicated part of her statement to understanding Sabalenka's emotional state. She acknowledged how losing a major final can feel devastating, especially after investing every ounce of energy into the competition. In doing so, Gauff sidestepped confrontation and modeled respect. Reflection on the backlash. Gauff didn't ignore the fan reactions. Instead, she gently called for balance. Sports, and the discussions around them, should celebrate competition without derailing into personal attacks. She reminded her audience that athletes on the tour are human beings first, subject to pressure, fatigue, and the very real vulnerability that comes after big losses. A broader message of unity. Perhaps most importantly, Gauff's statement underscored her belief that professional rivalry doesn't have to translate into personal animosity. At its best, sportsmanship elevates both players, even when one walks away with the trophy. Her words weren't defensive or reactive, they were affirmative and purposeful, advocating for respect, empathy, and dignity, even in a world where social media can amplify every misstep. Beyond the headlines, what this moment represents. This episode unfolded not just as a sports story, but as a cultural lesson in communication, judgment, and emotional intelligence. Sportsmanship in the modern age. For decades, tennis has prized decorum and respect, from Arthur Ashe's dignity to Roger Federer's graciousness in defeat. In that lineage, Gauff's response showcased a new generation of athlete who understands how words travel in the digital era and how responsibility grows with visibility.